A lone figure moved with a deliberate pace, his shadow long against the fading orange of the sunset. The young widow stood at the edge of the creek, her eyes fixed on him. Her hands trembled as she clutched the frayed shawl around her shoulders, not from the cold, but from a question that had been gnawing at her since the day the world had turned its back on her. "Where do people go when everyone rejects them?" she asked, her voice barely carrying over the wind. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with loss and longing, and yet tinged with a faint thread of hope that she dared not name. The Apache, a man whose name alone made men think twice before drawing a gun, paused in his stride. His dark eyes, sharp and assessing, fixed on her, and for a moment the wide, empty plains held only their presence. He was feared for a reason, not for cruelty but for the way he moved through the world, untouchable and silent, like a shadow that carried the memory of countless battles. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he tilted his head, listening to the land itself as if it whispered secrets meant only for him. The widow felt a strange chill, not of the air, but of the weight behind his gaze. It was the kind of gaze that measured the truth in a person's soul, the kind that could see the cracks and the fears even when words were left unspoken. "They go," he said at last, his voice low and steady, "to the places that fear cannot reach. To the edges where the world forgets them, or pretends to." He took a step closer, and the dust of the plains stirred at his boots. His presence was commanding, not because of size, but because of certainty. Every motion, every measured breath, told a story of survival, of battles fought both outside and within. The widow shivered, though not from cold. She had known rejection, seen the sharp edges of judgment from neighbors and strangers alike. After the death of her husband, she had wandered through towns and settlements, searching for a place where her grief might be tolerated, where her presence would not be met with whispered warnings or pointed fingers. Everywhere she went, doors closed, eyes averted. And now, standing before this man, feared and mysterious, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Possibility. He crouched near the water's edge, his hand brushing the surface of the creek, sending ripples that danced like fleeting memories across the reflection of the dying sun. "There is a place," he continued, "where those who are cast aside find each other, where the past does not matter, and the only law is the one you choose to follow." His eyes flicked back to her, dark and unreadable. "But it is not easy. The road is long, and the choices you make, they will follow you, always." The widow hesitated. Her life until now had been a careful collection of steps to avoid pain, to stay unnoticed, to survive quietly. The thought of stepping into the unknown with someone whose reputation could chill a town into silence was terrifying, and yet the pull was undeniable. She felt as though she had been standing at the edge of a cliff for her entire life, and now someone was offering her the chance to leap. "You think fear keeps people alive," he said, almost reading her mind, "but it is courage that shapes them. And courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to face it, even when everything says you should run." He stood then, the Apache who was most feared, the man whose name carried weight beyond the borders of any settlement. He looked to the horizon, where the last light of day clung to the clouds like fire trapped in smoke. "There are others," he added quietly, almost to himself. "People like you. People like me. We have all been turned away, and yet here we are, standing." The widow felt the weight of his words settle around her like a cloak. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel invisible. She felt noticed, measured, and yet strangely protected. She wanted to ask him more, to know what lay ahead, but the moment seemed to stretch, fragile as the morning frost before the sun touches it. And in that silence, the wind carried a new sound, a distant echo, faint but growing, like the rhythm of hooves or the clatter of wheels over hard ground. Something was coming, something that neither the widow nor the Apache could yet name. He noticed it too, his body tensing, every muscle coiled for action, but his eyes never left hers. "There are roads that must be walked alone," he said, voice quieter now, almost a murmur, "and roads that must be walked together. You decide which you take. But know this, once you step forward, there is no turning back. And the world, it will try to find you wherever you go." The widow swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on the shawl. Her heart raced, a mix of fear and anticipation. She thought of the small cabin she had called home, now empty and hollow, and of the towns that had whispered behind her back. Every rejection had cut deeper than the last, leaving her raw and uncertain. And yet, standing here with the man who was feared above all, she felt a spark of defiance, a flicker of rebellion against the quiet despair that had followed her like a shadow. He turned fully to face her, the wind tugging at his dark hair and the brim of his hat. The plains stretched endlessly behind him, an expanse of uncertainty and opportunity, and in that vast openness, his silhouette seemed almost like a promise. "Do you want to go?" he asked. No judgment in his tone, only clarity. The question hung in the air, heavier than any words could bear, demanding an answer that neither fear nor caution could provide. Her lips parted, and for a moment she could not speak. The weight of choice pressed down on her, but beneath it, a quiet, insistent voice inside whispered yes. Yes to the unknown. Yes to the path that no one else would take. Yes to stepping into a world where rejection could be left behind, where courage could define her, and where survival would be carved not by rules imposed, but by decisions made in the heart. The Apache's gaze softened slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that he understood more than she realized. But then the distant sound grew louder, sharper, more deliberate. Something or someone was approaching, and the calm of the plains was broken by the undeniable promise of conflict. His hand went to the leather strap at his side, and the widow felt a cold spike of reality. The road she was about to walk would not be easy. The past, the fears, and the dangers that lay ahead were only the beginning. She stepped closer, and the wind seemed to answer her, tugging at the edges of her shawl and carrying with it the scent of distant pine and smoke. The Apache did not move to stop her, only watched, his posture steady, unwavering, like a sentinel standing against an unseen storm. "Once you take this step," he said, voice low and steady, "there is no turning back. And some things you will see will change you in ways you cannot imagine." A flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but it was quickly replaced by determination. Every rejection, every whispered insult, every cold shoulder she had endured had led her to this exact moment. And now, with the man who was feared above all, she felt the possibility of something new, something alive. She felt the pull of destiny, fragile and insistent, urging her forward. The distant sound continued to grow, and now the sun had slipped entirely below the horizon, leaving the world bathed in shadow and half-light. The plains were empty, yet the emptiness felt full, pregnant with what was to come. The widow's heart pounded in her chest, a wild rhythm that matched the beat of the approaching threat. He nodded slightly, as if reading her resolve, and then his eyes shifted to the horizon. "We move at first light," he said, almost more to the wind than to her. "By then, we will know what waits for us, but make no mistake, there are eyes everywhere. The world has a way of watching, even when you think you are alone." The widow swallowed. A lump of anticipation and fear lodged in her throat. She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, to understand every shadow that moved across the plains. But the silence returned, pressing against them both, a waiting silence that seemed to stretch across time itself. And in that silence, the young widow realized that life had just handed her a choice far larger than she had ever imagined. A choice that would define everything she was and everything she could become. She looked at the Apache once more, the man who had walked through fear and emerged stronger, and something inside her shifted. The question she had asked, the question that had haunted her nights and her wandering days, found a new meaning. People who are rejected, people cast aside, find themselves at crossroads that most never see. And sometimes, the only way forward is to step into the unknown with someone who understands the weight of survival, someone who carries the shadows of the past but moves forward anyway. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of tomorrow, and the distant sound, sharp, deliberate, approaching, reminded her that the world was never still, never safe. Choices had to be made, and the first step would not wait for hesitation. She inhaled deeply, feeling the tension coil in her chest, and for the first time in months, she felt alive, alert, and ready. The Apache tilted his head toward the horizon, his eyes catching the faint glimmer of movement that the plains tried to hide. He was silent now, but the weight of his presence spoke louder than any words could. The young widow's grip on her shawl tightened, and in that shared silence, a question lingered between them. Unspoken but clear. When the world rejects you, where do you go? And are you willing to face what waits at the edge? The sun disappeared completely, leaving the plains a shadowed expanse of uncertainty. The distant sound grew louder, a reminder that the night would bring trials, and the choice to step forward was no longer theoretical, it was imminent. She met his gaze one last time, and in that look, the unspoken agreement passed between them. The journey was about to begin, and nothing, neither fear nor rejection nor the darkness ahead, would be enough to stop what was coming next. The night pressed down on the plains like a heavy blanket, thick with shadows and the scent of dry grass. The widow stayed close to the Apache, feeling the heat of his presence despite the chill creeping along the ground. He moved with the quiet certainty of a predator, steps deliberate, senses alert to every flicker of movement around them. She had followed men before, strangers and friends alike, but never one like him, someone whose silence carried more weight than any words could. He did not speak for long stretches, only occasionally nodding to indicate a change in direction or a hazard hidden in the dim light. The widow noticed how his eyes scanned the horizon constantly, picking out shapes and textures she could not even see, and she realized quickly that he had spent years reading the land as if it were an open book. Each ridge, each shadow dip in the plains, spoke to him, and she felt as though she were walking in the company of someone who belonged entirely to the world of survival. "What is this place?" she asked finally, her voice low, careful not to break the rhythm of their movement. "Where are we going?" He glanced at her briefly, dark eyes reflecting the faint starlight. "The world has many edges," he said, voice steady but not unkind. "Some you stumble across by chance, others you are led to. This place is neither town nor settlement. It is a space between. People who cannot be anywhere else find themselves here." She thought of the town she had passed through, the faces that turned away, the whispered warnings behind closed doors. And now, here she was, walking alongside the man who had been feared across 3 counties, and the idea of a place untouched by judgment seemed almost impossible. Yet, as they moved further into the darkness, she began to see glimpses of it, the faint glow of a fire in the distance, the subtle outline of structures that were built not for grandeur, but for safety, for survival. He stopped near a rise and crouched, motioning for her to do the same. From there, she could see the shapes more clearly. Small cabins of weathered wood, smoke curling from low chimneys, and figures moving cautiously among them. Nothing extravagant, nothing welcoming in the sense of a town greeting a traveler with open arms, but alive, full of people who had found each other despite the world that rejected them. "They have made a life here," he said softly, "and they guard it fiercely, but this is not a place for the faint-hearted. To stay, you must be willing to face what others would hide and to fight when necessary." She nodded, unsure if her courage was enough, unsure if her heart had grown strong enough after months of loss and wandering. But the look in his eyes told her that there was no easy way to measure worth here. The world had rejected them both in different ways, and this place was neither mercy nor punishment. It was a test. The Apache moved forward again, leading her down a shallow depression in the plains. The firelight from the settlement flickered against the distant hills, and she could make out figures, some tending small gardens, others carrying supplies, all moving with the quiet rhythm of people who had learned to survive in a harsh world. It was a small society, tight-knit, wary, and yet undeniably alive. "Who are they?" she asked, curiosity mixing with apprehension. "People who refuse to be forgotten," he said. "People who have been cast aside, cheated, or hunted. Some were criminals in the eyes of townsfolk. Others were simply misunderstood. They found this place because there was no other option, and they stay because here survival is earned, not granted." The widow's mind raced. Each person she had met in her travels had carried a story, and she had sensed the weight of those stories pressing down on her. Here, it seemed, the stories were not just weight, they were shields, tools, lessons, and warnings. Every person she glimpsed had lived through rejection, betrayal, or violence, and everyone had survived. The Apache led her closer, careful to keep them in shadow, until they reached the edge of the settlement. Here, the smell of smoke and cooked meat mixed with the scent of earth and livestock. The faint chatter of voices carried to them, low but deliberate, filled with the wary rhythm of those who measured trust as a currency far more valuable than gold. "They will judge you," he said, still crouched. "Not with cruelty, but with precision. They will test your story, your strength, your mind, and your heart. And if you pass, you may find a place among them. If you fail." He did not finish, letting the silence hang heavy between them. The widow understood. There was no middle ground here. No safe corners, no illusions of kindness. Survival demanded clarity, focus, and courage. Every misstep, every hesitation, could mark her as one who did not belong. And yet, for the first time in months, she felt the stirrings of purpose. The world might have rejected her, but this place, this shadowed refuge on the edge of everything, offered a chance to reclaim herself, to stand among others who had known pain, and to learn the laws of survival written in blood, sweat, and quiet resilience. As they moved closer, she could hear the low hum of activity, the subtle rhythm of lives intertwined. A child cried softly in the distance, answered by a mother's calm voice. A dog barked at something unseen, and the sound was met with laughter and scolding from a man moving nearby. Life, ordinary and extraordinary in its defiance, thrummed through the settlement. The Apache signaled for her to stop at the edge of a cluster of buildings. He lowered his voice. "There are factions," he explained, "groups that control different parts of this place. Some are territorial, some are protective, and some are dangerous in ways that are not immediately clear. You must learn their ways, understand their alliances, and never assume kindness is given freely. Here, trust is a weapon and a shield, often at the same time." She felt the weight of his words, the careful precision in the warning. Every settlement she had known had rules, but here the rules were lived, not written. Every eye she met in the shadows could be an ally or an adversary, and she would have to read them with the clarity of someone who had been hunted. A figure emerged from one of the cabins, a man with a wide-brimmed hat and a weathered face, hands roughened by labor. He paused when he saw them, eyes narrowing, then relaxing slightly when he recognized the Apache. There was a subtle shift in the air, an acknowledgement that the feared man carried authority even here. "You've brought another?" the man asked, voice cautious but not hostile. "Yes," the Apache replied. "She comes with questions, and she has chosen the road she walks. She will learn fast or she will not stay. That is the way here." The man studied her, measuring, testing, reading the tension and resolve in her stance. "The roads she chooses are not easy," he said, almost to himself. "This place will test her in ways the plains never could." The widow felt the scrutiny as a tangible weight, pressing down on her like the thick night around them. And yet, for the first time, she felt seen, not judged for who she had been, but measured for who she could become. Every glance, Every gesture spoke a language she was only beginning to understand, and she felt a cautious excitement stir within her. The Apache moved to the side, scanning the perimeter. "You will meet others," he said quietly. "Some will welcome you. Some will not. Watch, listen, and learn. The world beyond these plains has no place for weakness, but here, weakness is a teacher, a test, and sometimes a death sentence." The widow nodded, trying to absorb everything at once. Her life had been one of avoidance, of walking quietly through towns and avoiding attention. Here, attention was unavoidable, and she realized that it would be a force she had to harness rather than fear. The night deepened, and the settlement's fires glowed brighter against the dark. Shadows moved like whispers across the ground, carrying stories she could not yet know, histories she could only guess at. There was laughter, voices raised in debate, the clatter of tools, and the soft thrum of music played on a battered violin. The settlement was alive, a fragile but determined heartbeat in the midst of the vast plains, and it demanded respect for its resilience. The Apache finally spoke again, voice low, almost a whisper meant only for her. "Remember this," he said. "Out there," he gestured toward the world beyond the hills, "people cast you aside without thinking. Here, people test you for the same reason. They survive. They survive because they cannot afford to let weakness go unchecked. Learn from them, and you may find a place among the living. Fail, and—" He did not finish, letting the thought hang like smoke in the cold night air. The widow felt a shiver of anticipation, her heart racing. She understood now that this place was not a sanctuary in the way she had imagined. It was a crucible, and she had been cast into it with no choice but to endure, adapt, and learn. The Apache's presence was a shield, but not a guarantee, and the settlement itself was a force of nature, governed by rules older and sharper than any town ordinance. The distant noises of the night shifted again, a shout, the crash of wood, the soft thud of footsteps on dirt. Her pulse quickened, and she realized that the shadows were not just empty spaces. They were alive with people who had stories, wounds, and ambitions. Every movement mattered, every glance held meaning, and every decision could change the course of her first night here. The Apache inclined his head toward a narrow path between two cabins. "This way," he said. "The first trials await, and the night does not wait for hesitation. Keep your eyes open and your heart steady. You will be tested soon, and only those who walk with awareness will endure." She followed him, shivering not from the cold but from the weight of what she was stepping into. Each step carried her further from the world she had known and closer to a world that demanded strength, cunning, and courage. She realized that acceptance here was earned, trust was fragile, and the shadows held both allies and threats alike. As they disappeared into the path, the fires of the settlement flickered behind them, illuminating faces that watched silently, curiously, and cautiously. The night was alive, the plains full of stories yet untold, and the journey the widow had embarked upon had only just begun. And in the darkness, the first hints of danger stirred something unseen, patient, and watching, waiting for the moment to strike, reminding her that the road to survival would be anything but simple. The path narrowed as they moved between the cabins, the night pressing close on both sides. Shadows pooled around the corners, hiding movement, hiding intent. The widow's heartbeat thudded in her chest, a wild rhythm she tried to steady with shallow breaths. She was aware of every sound, the soft scrape of boots on dirt, the faint whisper of wind through the wooden walls, even the distant cry of a child that made her chest tighten. Here, everything mattered and nothing could be ignored. The Apache moved ahead with a careful silence, his hand resting near the leather strap at his side as if ready for any sudden threat. She noticed how his eyes scanned constantly, noting angles, listening for the subtle shifts of life that might signal danger or deceit. She realized then that survival here was more than endurance. It was attention, understanding, and the willingness to act before others even realized the need. A figure stepped out from a cabin ahead, a man of medium build with a scar running down his cheek. His eyes, dark and calculating, swept over them quickly. The Apache's posture did not change, but she could feel the tension radiating from the space between them. "Who comes at this hour?" The scarred man asked, voice low, deliberate. He was cautious, but not openly hostile, the way someone who had survived many tests learned to measure threats. "The world has sent her," the Apache said simply, "and she chooses to walk among us. If you have doubts, watch and see if she stands." The man's gaze lingered on the widow, weighing, measuring, searching for cracks in her resolve. She could feel the weight of it like a physical pressure, and instinctively she straightened, lifted her chin, and met his gaze. She knew nothing would be given freely here. Trust had to be earned, courage displayed, and the shadowed history she carried would be tested in ways she could not yet predict. "Follow me," the scarred man said at last, turning and moving down a narrow alley between two more cabins. The widow and the Apache followed, the path twisting and turning, leading them deeper into the heart of the settlement. As they walked, the widow noticed small details, the way certain cabins were reinforced with extra planks, the careful placement of fires to light paths without revealing every movement, the subtle signals exchanged between people who understood every nuance of survival. This was a community born of necessity, crafted from the lessons of rejection, danger, and betrayal. Each person had a role, and each role carried weight. "This is the council," the scarred man said, stopping before a larger cabin, its walls reinforced with iron and wood. "Decisions are made here, disputes settled, alliances tested. Everyone has a voice, but every voice must prove its worth. Step carefully." The widow glanced at the Apache. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, a signal that she was ready, that he trusted her to navigate the first challenge. The widow took a deep breath and followed the scarred man inside. Inside, the room was dimly lit by lanterns. Several figures sat around a long table, their faces worn by age, experience, and hardship. Some had the hard edges of fighters, others the quiet watchfulness of survivors who had learned to live by observation rather than force. The widow felt the intensity of their scrutiny as soon as she entered. Every eye measured her, weighed her, and she realized that here, her story, her losses, and her fears were all part of the test. "State your name," one of the council members said, a woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes sharp as flint. Her voice was firm, carrying authority without threat. "I am." The widow hesitated, caught between the weight of her past and the new life she sought. "I am someone who has been rejected, who has been cast aside, but I want to learn, to survive, to belong." A murmur ran through the council, a low hum of recognition. They knew the language of survival. They knew the courage it took to speak honestly in the face of judgment. The Apache stepped forward, his presence commanding the room without a word. "She comes not for mercy," he said. "She comes because she chooses to face what most would run from. That is worth noting." The council members exchanged glances, subtle nods of acknowledgement passing between them. Then, without another word, the gray-haired woman leaned forward. "You will be tested," she said, voice low but cutting through the quiet. "Not tomorrow, not next week. Now, tonight. There are those who watch for weakness, who exploit hesitation. The settlement thrives because it does not forgive error. Can you survive that?" The widow swallowed, feeling the weight of the question, knowing that every answer she gave here mattered more than any words she had spoken in towns that had rejected her. "I will try," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of fear in her chest. The gray-haired woman's eyes did not soften. "Trying is not enough," she said. "You will act. You will observe. You will adapt. If you cannot, you will be cast out or worse." The Apache's hand brushed briefly against her shoulder, a silent reassurance. Then he stepped back, allowing her to stand on her own, and she felt the pressure of responsibility settle on her like a mantle she could not shed. The council gave no further warnings, only gestures indicating that she was to follow the scarred man. They moved through a back passage that opened to the edge of the settlement. Here, the ground was uneven, littered with the remnants of past storms and hurried repairs. Fires burned in small pits, illuminating the night just enough to show that this part of the settlement was less guarded, more wild, more dangerous. "This is the outer circle," the scarred man said. "Those who survive here, those who prove themselves, may enter the heart. But the outer circle tests you in ways the council does not see. Watch your back and keep your eyes open. The shadows are alive, and not all shadows are friendly." The widow's pulse quickened. She saw figures moving in the darkness, shapes that could be workers, hunters, or watchers. Each step carried risk, and every sound could signal danger. She realized that the settlement, while alive, was not safe. Its survival depended on vigilance, courage, and the willingness to face conflict head-on. Suddenly, a shout broke the quiet. A figure stumbled into view, clutching a wound in his side. Blood soaked his shirt, dark against the lantern light. Two others ran behind him, weapons drawn, scanning the area for threats. The widow froze, unsure whether to move or stay hidden. The Apache's hand closed briefly on hers, a subtle signal to remain calm. "They were attacked," the scarred man said, his voice tight. "By whom we don't know. The outer circle is dangerous tonight. Stay close and watch." The wounded man collapsed near a fire pit, gasping, and the widow saw the raw fear in his eyes. He looked at her briefly, as if weighing whether she would help or falter. She stepped forward instinctively, offering her hands, and he nodded, recognizing her willingness to act. The Apache moved to cover them, scanning the darkness with hawk-like precision. "They are close," he murmured, barely audible, "and they are patient. Watch for movement, any hint of intent." The widow felt her heart hammering in her chest as they worked to stabilize the injured man. Every noise, the rustle of the wind, the snap of a branch, the low murmur of the settlement beyond felt magnified. The threat was real, unseen, but undeniable. Her training in towns and quiet survival meant nothing here. This was life measured in split-second decisions, courage weighed against consequence. A shadow flickered near the edge of the firelight. She saw at first a dark shape, moving with purpose. The Apache's hand went to his strap, and the scarred man hissed a warning. The widow held her breath, feeling the raw tension coil in her chest like a steel spring. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to run, to fight, and yet she forced herself to stay steady. "Do you see them?" she whispered, almost to herself. "I do," the Apache replied, voice calm but edged with focus. "And they are testing us. Patience is your ally tonight. Move too soon, and you make yourself vulnerable." The shadow moved again, closer now, and she saw the glint of a weapon in its hands. Not everyone here was part of the settlement, she realized. There were predators, opportunists, those who watched for weakness and struck without hesitation. And this was the first real test of her courage, her presence, and her ability to act under pressure. The injured man groaned softly. She glanced at him, then back at the Apache and the shadow, her mind racing. She understood now that survival was not just about strength, but about reading the world, understanding threats, and acting with precision. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced them still, focusing on what mattered, the balance between action and patience, courage and awareness. The Apache shifted, a subtle movement that spoke volumes. He was ready to strike if necessary, but his eyes stayed on her, measuring, teaching without words. She realized that her place in this world depended on her ability to learn fast, act decisively, and endure the weight of fear without letting it control her. The shadow hesitated, and in that pause she saw opportunity and danger entwined. Her heart raced and she felt the full weight of the night pressing in, the dangers of the outer circle, the judgment of the council, the expectations of the Apache who had brought her here. Every decision from this point would ripple through the settlement, through her life, and through the fragile web of trust she was beginning to weave. Then the shadow moved again, faster this time, and she knew that the moment of trial had arrived. The night held its breath, the fires flickered, and the fate of the widow in the outer circle hung poised on the edge of every heartbeat. The shadow froze just beyond the firelight, a dark, uncertain shape that moved with deliberate caution. The widow's breath caught in her chest, the rhythm of her heart hammering as though it might tear free from her ribcage. She could feel the tension in the Apache beside her, the coiled readiness of someone who had faced threats too numerous to count and had survived them all. Every muscle in his body was poised, yet there was patience in his stance, the kind of patience born from years of knowing that rushing in recklessly could mean death. The wounded man whimpered softly, and she instinctively reached for him, brushing her hand along his arm. He flinched, but did not protest, as if he understood her presence meant aid, not harm. The shadow shifted again, closer this time, and the glint of steel caught in the faint firelight. Her stomach tightened, a sharp coil of fear and anticipation. "Stay calm," the Apache murmured, barely audible. His voice was a tether in the chaos, anchoring her thoughts. "We wait for the moment. Watch. Learn." The widow swallowed hard, nodding, forcing herself to steady her hands and focus on the details. Every flicker of movement in the shadows, every sound rustling grass, snapping twig, distant echo of hooves carried meaning. She realized fully now that the outer circle did not merely test strength or courage. It tested awareness, intuition, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. The shadow lunged suddenly, breaking the tense pause. Two figures emerged from the darkness, weapons raised, their intent clear. The Apache reacted instantly, moving like a shadow of his own, striking with precision, disarming one attacker before the second could raise his weapon fully. The widow's eyes widened, her pulse accelerating. She had never seen action unfold with such efficiency, the movements measured yet explosive, the silent rhythm of survival translated into motion. "Move!" the Apache hissed, and the widow followed instinctively, moving the wounded man behind the cover of a low wall. Her hands were steady now, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. Every instinct she had buried through months of fear and wandering rose to the surface, guiding her decisions, sharpening her senses. The attackers pressed forward, but the settlement itself seemed alive, responding to the threat. Figures emerged from the darkness, armed and ready, converging on the intruders with a coordinated efficiency that spoke of experience and unspoken rules. The widow felt a surge of hope, a realization that this place, dangerous and harsh as it was, had order and strength built from survival itself. She could see the scarred man moving alongside her now, guiding the wounded man and signaling others with precise gestures. The Apache had engaged fully, a blur of movement and calm focus, and she realized that this was not just a fight, it was a test of endurance, courage, and trust. The attackers faltered under the coordinated response of the settlement. One went down with a swift strike from a hidden defender, while the other hesitated, caught between retreat and aggression. The widow's breath came faster, and she felt the raw pull of adrenaline. Every moment mattered, every choice carried weight. She had never felt more alive, more connected to the pulse of life around her than she did in those tense, shadowed seconds. A shout rang out from the opposite edge of the outer circle, drawing attention to another part of the settlement. She caught sight of figures moving toward a smaller cabin, where smoke had begun to rise in unnatural patterns. Her stomach clenched. Another danger, another threat, and she realized that the night was far from over. The Apache's hand gripped her shoulder briefly, guiding her toward the cabin with the wounded man. "Keep him steady," he instructed, voice calm but firm. "We cannot afford mistakes. Stay aware of everything around you." She nodded, focusing on the injured man, his breaths ragged, his eyes wide with fear. As they moved, She could see more figures emerging from the darkness, the settlement responding like a living organism. There was a rhythm to the chaos, a method beneath the apparent disorder. She realized fully that the outer circle was both a crucible and a classroom, testing every skill she had and forcing her to learn new ones instantly. A figure broke from the shadows near the cabin, moving with surprising speed. The Apache reacted first, intercepting the threat with a combination of force and precision. The widow froze for a moment, heart pounding, then acted on instinct, grabbing a nearby stick and swinging it at a second attacker who had come too close. The sound of impact rang through the night, startling both the attacker and herself. She realized with a jolt that she had survived the moment, that she had acted decisively, and that for the first time, fear had not paralyzed her. The wounded man coughed, trying to steady himself. "I thought it was over," he muttered, voice trembling. "I didn't think anyone would come." She glanced at him, offering a faint smile despite the tension. "We're here," she said softly. "You're not alone." The Apache's voice broke through the noise, calm but commanding. "Clear the cabin. Secure the perimeter. There may be more." His words were simple, but carried authority that left no room for hesitation. The widow followed, moving with the wounded man toward the cabin, where more shadows and movement awaited. She felt the weight of responsibility, the intensity of the night pressing down on her, and yet a strange clarity emerged. She was no longer merely surviving, she was participating, influencing the outcome, becoming part of something larger than herself. Inside the cabin, they found overturned supplies and signs of struggle. She could see the marks of conflict, the evidence that the attackers had been methodical, seeking something valuable, though what exactly she could not tell. The wounded man leaned against the wall, catching his breath, while the widow scanned for any further threats. Every sound, every flicker of movement in the dim light sharpened her awareness. "They came for something," the Apache said, examining the scene. "We do not yet know what, but this is only the beginning." His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "Tonight will test you more than you imagine. Every choice, every move matters." The widow nodded, feeling both fear and anticipation. The night was far from over, and she knew instinctively that the settlement's response had been only the first stage. There would be more trials, more threats, and she would be pushed to limits she had not known existed. A sudden noise outside drew their attention, a low, deliberate sound, like someone moving through the brush with careful intent. The Apache signaled for silence, listening intently, his body coiled like a spring ready to strike. The widow felt the tension coil within her as well, each nerve alive, each sense alert to the faintest disturbance. Two figures emerged from the darkness, hands raised, not in surrender but in careful approach. They were not attackers, she realized with a relief she barely allowed herself, but allies returning from patrol. They brought news of movement on the far edge of the outer circle, a potential threat approaching from the plains beyond. The Apache's expression darkened. "They are testing us," he said quietly. "They want to see how we respond, how quickly we adapt. Stay ready. Do not let your guard down for a second." The widow felt the weight of his words, understanding fully now that the night would not forgive mistakes. Each moment carried consequence, and every decision had the potential to shift the balance between survival and defeat. She realized that courage alone was not enough. Clarity, awareness, and decisive action were equally vital. The wounded man recovered enough to stand, leaning slightly on the widow's shoulder for support. I thought I was done," he admitted. "I didn't know if I could keep going." "You can," she said firmly. "We all can. We've survived this far, and we'll survive what comes next." The Apache moved to the edge of the firelight, scanning the plains, his silhouette tense against the night sky. "Prepare yourselves," he said. "They will come again, and this time it will be closer, faster, and more dangerous. Every lesson you've learned tonight will be tested. Remember your place, trust your instincts, and watch one another's backs. The night is not done with us yet." The widow felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with a strange calm. She had faced fear, acted decisively, and survived moments that would have frozen her before. The lessons of rejection, wandering, and survival coalesced into a sharper understanding of herself, of the settlement, and of the unspoken rules that govern both. The shadows shifted again, and she saw movement on the edge of the outer circle, a small group, approaching cautiously, testing the settlement's defenses. The Apache's eyes narrowed, and he signaled for the defenders to prepare. She tightened her grip on the wounded man, positioning herself behind cover, ready to act if necessary. The tension was almost unbearable, every second stretched to a razor's edge. The night held its breath, and the widow felt the weight of every decision she had made, every step she had taken to arrive here. The Apache's presence was a steady anchor, but she knew she could not rely on him alone. She had to be ready, fully present, and capable of acting when the moment demanded it. The approaching group paused, and she could see the glint of weapons, the careful scanning of the settlement, the hesitation that revealed both caution and intent. Every instinct screamed at her to prepare, to anticipate, to act with clarity and precision. "Stay ready," the Apache whispered. "This is the moment. All of tonight leads to this. Watch the shadows, trust your instincts, and do not falter." The widow's hands were steady now, her senses heightened to every detail, every sound, every flicker of movement. She realized that this was more than a test of courage. It was a test of everything she had learned, everything she had survived, and everything she could become. The night thickened around them, the shadows alive with intent, the firelight flickering across tense faces. The settlement braced, the outer circle holding its breath. And in that moment, the widow understood fully that what came next would define not only her place here, but the fragile balance of survival itself. The Apache's hand brushed briefly against hers, a subtle signal, a reminder that they faced the coming storm together. The night held a promise of danger, a thrill of anticipation, and a test that would push them all to the edge. The widow drew in a deep, steadying breath, ready to meet whatever waited in the darkness, aware that the night's climax was fast approaching, and that the first steps toward hope and belonging were only just beginning. The night seemed to hold its breath as the last of the shadows approached the settlement. The widow felt every muscle in her body tense, ready to react, but something had shifted within her. Fear was no longer a paralyzing force, it had become a tool, a sharpened edge that focused her attention and honed her instincts. She watched the figures carefully, noting the slight hesitation in their steps, the uneven rhythm that gave away their uncertainty. The Apache beside her remained calm, his presence steadying, a reminder that they could face anything if they acted together. The attackers had clearly underestimated the settlement. The coordinated response of the defenders, the carefully positioned fires, the hidden allies waiting in shadows, it all had created a wall of resolve too strong to breach. One by one, the intruders faltered, tripped by traps or confronted by figures moving with practiced precision. The widow moved instinctively, guiding the wounded man behind cover, signaling silently to others, and for the first time feeling the rhythm of teamwork, of survival shared among people who trusted each other because they had to. A sudden movement caught her eye, and she saw a young defender intercept one of the attackers who had tried to flank the settlement. The fight was brief but decisive. The attacker disarmed and sent running into the darkness, leaving nothing but the echoes of hurried footsteps and the rustle of grass. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that danger could return at any moment. Here, survival was never permanent, only earned again and again. The Apache's voice broke the tense silence. "Check for wounded," he ordered, his tone calm but commanding. "Every person counts. No one is left behind." The widow helped the injured man to a more secure place where others could tend his wounds. The scarred man appeared at her side, offering assistance and reassurance. "You did well," he said quietly. "Tonight proved more than courage. You acted with clarity. That is rare among new arrivals." The wounded man looked at her, gratitude and awe in his eyes. I don't know how I could have survived without you," he admitted. "You survived because you trusted," she said gently. "We all did, together. That is what kept us alive." The Apache scanned the perimeter one last time, ensuring the immediate threat had passed. He turned to the widow, dark eyes meeting hers. "This night was only the beginning," he said. "You have learned what it means to face fear, to act decisively, and to trust those around you. That is the foundation of life here. Remember it." As dawn approached, the first light of morning touched the settlement, softening the shadows and revealing the resilience that had carried them through the night. The fires burned lower now, smoke curling lazily into the pale sky. The settlement's inhabitants began to emerge from their shelters, checking on each other, tending to injuries, and restoring the order disrupted by the night's events. The widow stood quietly, watching, feeling the full weight of what she had experienced. She had entered this place as a woman broken by rejection, uncertain of her own strength and unworthy of trust. But the night had shown her another truth. Survival demanded courage, awareness, and the willingness to act in the face of fear. She had discovered reserves of strength she had never known, and for the first time she felt she belonged somewhere. The scarred man approached her, offering a small, approving nod. "The council will meet soon," he said. "They will hear of your actions. It is rare for a newcomer to step forward with such presence. You have earned their notice." The Apache's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "Notice is not the goal," he said. "Understanding, courage, and trust, that is what matters. You have shown all three. Hold on to that." The settlement's children began to play near the edges of the firelight, laughter mingling with the crackle of dying flames. The wounded man, now bandaged and supported, moved cautiously among them, a quiet smile on his face. The widow realized that life here was not only survival, it was also connection, care, and the quiet joy of shared existence after hardship. She walked through the settlement with the Apache, observing the routines and the small acts of resilience that had allowed this place to endure. People mended clothing, prepared meals, shared stories, and tended to each other without fanfare. There lives a quiet testament to the strength forged in the crucible of rejection and danger. At the council cabin, the gray-haired woman awaited, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You have faced the outer circle well," she said. "You acted with courage, with thought, and with awareness. That is all we ask of those who join us. Tonight proved that you can endure, and that you understand what it means to be part of this community." The widow bowed her head in gratitude. "I will do my best," she said. "I will learn, I will act, and I will stand by those who stand beside me." "You will," the councilwoman said with a slight smile. "And you will find that this place, as harsh as it may seem, is capable of giving more than mere survival. It offers trust, respect, and the knowledge that you belong when you have earned it. That is rare, and it is precious." The Apache stood silently nearby, his gaze scanning the horizon, ever alert even in moments of calm. He did not speak, but the widow understood his approval, the quiet acknowledgment of her growth through the night's trials. As the settlement settled into the soft light of morning, the widow walked among the people, recognizing the strength in every pair of eyes, every cautious smile, every gesture of support. She had entered this world as an outsider, uncertain and broken. Now she felt the stirrings of purpose, the first clear steps toward belonging. The night's danger had passed, leaving scars and lessons, but also a sense of accomplishment and a foundation upon which to build. The Apache finally turned to her, voice low and steady. "Remember this night. Remember what you learned. Trust is not given freely, but it can be earned. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, and survival. Survival is the reward for those who refuse to give in. She nodded, feeling a deep sense of resolve. The lessons of the outer circle, the trust of allies, the trials faced under the watchful eyes of the council, all of it had changed her. She understood now that the path forward would not be easy, but it would be meaningful, filled with purpose and connection she had never imagined possible. The wounded man smiled at her, a simple gesture that carried profound gratitude. The children laughed nearby, playing freely, unburdened by the dangers of the night. The settlement breathed with life, resilience, and determination. And in that moment, the widow felt something she had not known for a long time, a sense of peace, tempered by the knowledge that challenges would come again, but that she would be ready. The Apache's eyes met hers one last time before he turned back to the horizon. "You are ready," he said. "Not just to survive, but to live. Remember that. Every choice you make will shape your place here and your place among those who have also been cast aside. There is strength in belonging, in connection, and in the courage to face the unknown." The widow breathed in the morning air, carrying the scent of fire, earth, and life renewed. She had crossed a threshold, stepping from rejection and fear into a world where she could contribute, belong, and grow. The night had tested her, pushed her to the edge, and demanded everything she could offer, and she had endured. As the first light of the sun spread across the plains, illuminating the settlement and the people who had fought and survived, the widow felt hope stirring within her. The Apache walked silently beside her, a steadfast guide and witness to her transformation. The council watched, approving silently, understanding that the trials of the night had not only tested the newcomer, but had strengthened the bonds that held the settlement together. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more tests of courage, awareness, and trust. But she also knew that she had found a place where her efforts, her choices, and her actions mattered, where the lessons of rejection had been transformed into strength, resilience, and the beginnings of belonging. And in that quiet, resilient settlement, on the edge of the world that had once turned her away, the widow understood the truth she had sought for so long. People who are rejected do not disappear. They find a way to endure, to survive, and to build new lives with those who understand their struggles. They find strength in one another, purpose in the face of fear, and a place where they are truly seen. The Apache's presence remained a constant reassurance. The scarred man offered quiet guidance, and the council's watchful eyes promised structure and fairness. The widow realized that she was no longer alone, and that the outer circle, once a symbol of danger and uncertainty, had become a crucible of transformation, forging courage, connection, and hope. As she moved among the settlement, greeting those who had survived alongside her, tending quietly to the wounded, and offering encouragement where she could, the widow felt the weight of the night lift. The challenges had tested her, but they had also taught her the power of perseverance, the importance of trust, and the value of courage guided by awareness. And so, on the plains where the shadows of fear had once held her captive, she now walked with purpose, surrounded by people who had known rejection but refused to be defeated. The settlement thrived in its fragile strength, a testament to the resilience of those who refused to be forgotten. The widow paused near the edge of the camp, looking out across the plains bathed in dawn's light. She felt the warmth of the sun on her face, the solid ground beneath her feet, and the quiet promise of belonging in her heart. She had survived the night, learned its lessons, and discovered the beginnings of hope. The Apache stood silently beside her, a guardian, a teacher, and a witness to her transformation. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt the unshakable certainty that she had a place in the world, a place earned, a place deserved, and a place where she could thrive. The challenges of the past would remain, but they had forged her into someone stronger, capable, and ready to embrace the life ahead. The settlement stirred with quiet energy, fires burning low, people moving with purpose, children playing, the wounded cared for, and the council preparing for the day's decisions. Life had returned to rhythm, yet beneath it all, the lessons of the night lingered, guiding the actions, choices, and bonds of all who lived here. The widow smiled softly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had entered the outer circle seeking safety, unsure of herself, uncertain of her strength. She had faced danger, witnessed courage, acted decisively, and earned the trust of those around her. She had discovered that even in a world that rejects, there is a place for those who are willing to stand, to act, and to endure. And as the sun climbed higher over the plains, illuminating the settlement and the people she now called her own, the widow understood fully the answer to the question that had brought her here. When everyone rejects you, you go where the strong, the brave, and the determined have carved out a place for themselves. You endure, you learn, and you build a life where survival becomes belonging and belonging becomes hope. She turned to the Apache, who gave her a small, approving nod. Then she looked out over the settlement at the people who had survived the night and felt a warmth in her chest. For the first time, she was not alone. She was part of something greater, a community forged by resilience, trust, and courage. And in that moment, under the rising sun, the widow knew that the night's trials had passed, the danger had been met, and the journey forward was hers to shape. The outer circle had tested her, but it had also given her something far greater than mere survival. It had given her a home. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke, earth, and life renewed, and the widow breathed it in, steady and sure. The Apache remained at her side, silent yet watchful, and the settlement moved with the quiet energy of those who had endured and would endure again. She had faced the darkness, and now she walked toward the light of belonging, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. In that place of resilience and quiet triumph, the widow finally understood. Even when rejected by the world, there are those who find strength, forge bonds, and build lives worth living. And she would walk among them, no longer as an outsider, but as one who belonged, who survived, and who had discovered the courage to embrace her future. The sun rose fully over the plains, and with it came a sense of peace, connection, and possibility. The widow smiled, knowing that while challenges would come again, she was ready. She had learned the lessons of fear, trust, and courage. She had discovered the power of endurance, and in the outer circle, she had found her place. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive.